Welcome to Bloomwood, Kentucky, where secrets bloom, gossip grows, and mysteries have a way of finding me. I'm Iris Thorne, and this is a Thorne Sisters Sleuths cozy mystery. Previously, in Buttercups, Barbecue, and Burglary, a Thorne Sisters Sleuths cozy mystery by D.G. Thomas. With Bloomwood divided and Pastor Earl stepping down, the mystery seemed farther from being solved than ever. Then a forgotten detail changed everything. 5 missing Buttercup centerpieces connected to the fundraiser. As hidden clues began pointing towards secrets buried within church records, Poppy and I realized the missing money might only be part of a much larger story. Now, with the truth finally within reach, we're preparing one last move to uncover who stole the church funds. And why. Now, the mystery continues. Part 4. This was never about the money. You learn a lot about people when you work with flowers. You learn who plans ahead, who waits until the last minute, who buys apology roses every month and somehow never learns their lesson, and occasionally, you learn that missing flowers matter a whole lot more than they should. By Tuesday morning, the Buttercup vase sat on the consultation table at Blossom and Thorne, right beside a cup of coffee, 3 folders, and one increasingly frustrated florist. The vase itself looked ordinary. White ceramic, simple design, one of 5 centerpieces created for the church fundraiser. One of 5 that had mysteriously vanished. Until now. Poppy stared at it. I still don't understand. I scratched my head as I looked at the vase. Neither do I. Dolly adjusted her bright sunflower earrings and squinted at the vase. Honey, nobody hides flowers unless they're hiding something else. Poppy looked up from the arrangement she had been working on. Dolly, I think that might be the most Bloomwood sentence you've ever said. Dolly looked pleased and smiled brightly. Why, thank you. The mystery of the missing centerpieces shouldn't have mattered, but my instincts refused to let it go. Somewhere between the fundraiser and the theft, somebody had taken 5 Buttercup arrangements, then hidden at least one behind the church office. Why? That question bounced around my brain all morning, along with another one. Why had nobody mentioned the missing? The bell over the front door jingled. Customers arrived. Flowers were arranged. Orders were delivered. Life continued. Yet the missing vases remained. A mystery. Around lunchtime, our answer finally arrived, or at least part of it, in the form of Cheryl Langford's niece, Tina, 22 years old, talkative, observant, and currently picking up flowers for her grandmother, which in Bloomwood often meant she was also delivering information, intentionally or otherwise. As I wrapped the arrangement, Tina glanced toward the Buttercup vase. Her expression changed, just slightly, but enough. You okay? I asked. She hesitated, then nodded, then immediately shook her head. Interesting. Very interesting. Poppy noticed too. What is it? Tina chewed her lip. I probably shouldn't say anything. That sentence has launched approximately 90% of Bloomwood's scandals. Dolly appeared from nowhere, as usual. Honey, she said as she put her hand on her hip. Tina sighed. I saw Aunt Cheryl behind the church office that night. The room froze. My pulse quickened. The night of the fundraiser, I asked. She nodded yes. What was she doing? I continued, hoping for more details. I don't know, she said, lacking confidence. Are you sure it was her? Poppy asked. I'm positive, she said, straightening her shoulders like she was ready to release the hesitation that had been holding her back. Tina shifted nervously, though. That wasn't what I'd expected. Not even close. Crying? I asked, probably sounding a little doubtful. She nodded again. Yes, like really crying. The room fell silent, because suddenly Cheryl looked different. Again. Not angry, not secretive, not guilty. Heartbroken. What happened after that? I asked. I don't know, Tina said. You didn't talk to her? Dolly asked. No, she replied. Tina looked uncomfortable. I figured she wanted privacy. That sounded reasonable. The information didn't, because it complicated everything, but understandable. Once Tina left, Dolly sat quietly for a long moment. Then she spoke. That woman ain't acting like somebody celebrating stolen money. No, she wasn't. And that bothered me a lot. That afternoon, our investigation shifted gears, again. After Philip finished his homework, he dug deeper into Cheryl's financial history. That was our deal. Homework first, then hacking financial accounts. It was the fastest I had ever seen Philip finish his homework. Poppy made phone calls. I reviewed church records. Meanwhile, Dolly did what Dolly did best. She talked to people. Church members, customers, neighbors. Folks tended to tell Dolly things. Mostly because she listened without judgment, and occasionally because she bribed them with pound cake. Around 3 o'clock she returned carrying both information and lemon cookies. A fairly typical Dolly combination. "What did you learn?" I asked. She settled into a chair. "Cheryl's daughter Amanda is in trouble." That wasn't new. We already knew about the debt. But Dolly shook her head. "Worse than we thought." The room quieted. "How much worse?" Poppy asked. "A lot," Dolly said, as she wiped sweat from her brow with her handkerchief. "Not helpful." Dolly continued. "Credit cards." "Yep," I said. She continued. "Personal loans." "Okay," I said, following along. She went on. "Missed payments." "Okay, Dolly, this is nothing new, just lay it on us," Poppy said in frustration. Then Dolly paused. "And somebody's threatening legal action." The room went still, because suddenly Amanda looked like a very plausible suspect. Desperate people made desperate choices. The theory fit. Almost too well. Again, I hated when things fit too perfectly. Late that afternoon, Detective Merritt stopped by. She studied the vase, the records, the notes, then looked at me. "You've got that look." "What look?" I said, trying my best to look innocent. "The one that says you're close to something," she replied. I laughed a little. "Maybe, Detective," I said. The detective folded her arms. "Tell me." So I did. The vase, the missing arrangements, Tina's story, Amanda's debt, the hidden buttercups, everything. Merritt listened quietly. When I finished, she nodded. Interesting. I hated that word. Detectives always used it right before refusing to explain themselves. "What?" I asked. She glanced at the vase. "Everybody keeps focusing on the money." "Because it was stolen," I said. "True," she agreed, then pointed toward the centerpiece. "But somebody took flowers first." The room fell silent, because that was exactly what had been bothering me. The flowers came before the theft, before the panic, before the investigation. The buttercups weren't connected afterward. They were connected before. A chill crept down my spine. What if the flowers weren't random? What if they were part of the plan? That evening, I sat at the consultation table after closing. The flower shop felt peaceful. Soft music played in the background. The scent of fresh flowers lingered in the air. Outside, Main Street settled into darkness. I studied photographs from the fundraiser, table decorations, crowd shots, volunteer pictures, anything that might help. Then I saw it. A detail so small I almost missed it. One of the buttercup centerpieces. Not on a table, not near the food, not near the donation station, near the church office, hidden partially behind a side entrance. My pulse quickened. I flipped to another photo. There it was again. The same arrangement. Different angle, same location. I grabbed a pen, marked the image. Then another thought struck me. A possibility. A terrible possibility. What if the missing vases weren't stolen? What if they were moved, placed deliberately, like markers, or hiding places? My heart started pounding, because if that was true, then whoever moved them had access to the church long before the fundraiser ended, and maybe even long before the money disappeared. Just then my phone buzzed. A text. From Opal Hightower. I opened it. 3 words. I remember now. I shot to my feet. Because suddenly one of our oldest clues wasn't a mystery anymore. And if Opal truly remembered who she saw near Calvin's truck, everything might change. Mama used to say the truth was a lot like a dandelion. You could mow it down, cover it up, pretend it wasn't there, but eventually it pushed its way back to the surface. By Wednesday morning, I was beginning to think Mama had been right. Again. The text from Opal Hightower had arrived just after 9 o'clock the night before. I remember now. 3 words, 3 glorious words, 3 words that had kept me awake half the night. By 8 the next morning, Poppy and I were sitting across from Opal in her kitchen. The smell of bacon and biscuits filled the air. A half-completed jigsaw puzzle covered one end of the table. Opal sat clutching a coffee mug with both hands. For once, she wasn't smiling. She looked nervous. I leaned in. "Tell us." Opal nodded slowly. "I remembered because I saw her yesterday." My pulse quickened. "Her?" "Uh-huh," she said. Poppy leaned forward. "Who?" Opal lowered her voice, as though someone might be hiding inside the sugar bowl. "Cheryl," she said. The room went silent. I stared. "You're sure?" I asked Opal. "Positive," she said. No hesitation, no uncertainty, no confusion, just certainty, the kind we'd been waiting for. Opal continued. "I saw Cheryl near Calvin's truck." "The day of the fundraiser?" I asked. Opal nodded. "Right before everybody started cleaning up." My stomach tightened. "What was she doing?" I asked. "I don't know," she replied. "That seemed to be a theme lately." Opal folded her arms and slightly lifted her chin. But she was there. I'm sure of it, she said confidently. Poppy exchanged a look with me. We believed her. This was huge. Not proof, but huge, because it placed Cheryl exactly where she'd always claimed she wasn't. After we left Opal's house, neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, Poppy broke the silence. Well? Yep, I agreed. This is bad, Poppy said as if it were a matter of fact. I looked at her. Very bad, I agreed, because suddenly the pieces were beginning to fit together. Not perfectly, but enough. The buttercup vases, the hidden arrangements, the tears behind the church office, the argument with Calvin, the mysterious legal account, the photograph, and now Cheryl, near Calvin's truck. The evidence was starting to point in one direction, toward Cheryl. Back at Blossom and Thorne, Dolly was rearranging a display of sunflowers when we walked in. Her earrings swung dramatically as she turned toward us. You found something. I was bewildered. How do you know? Baby, she gestured toward my face. You got your clue face on. Apparently clue face is a thing, I said. Poppy laughed. It's definitely a thing. We filled her in. Dolly listened quietly. For once she didn't interrupt, didn't joke. She simply listened. When we finished, she nodded. That worried me. What is it now? I asked. Dolly adjusted her scarf. Something still ain't right. I sighed. Not you too. What? She asked. I was so frustrated. Every time we think we're close, somebody says that. Then Dolly said, because every time y'all get close, something still ain't right. Unfortunately, she had a point. Because one question kept bothering me. If Cheryl stole the money, why? Not the surface answer, the real answer. Desperation explains some things, not all of them. People didn't usually orchestrate elaborate cover-ups over one bad decision. Not unless something bigger was hiding underneath. Around lunchtime, Philip came downstairs, carrying his laptop, and looking entirely too pleased with himself. What did you find this time, Philip? Poppy asked. He set the laptop on the consultation table, then turned the screen toward us. Bank records, church records, accounting reports, the kind of documents capable of causing immediate headaches. Philip pointed to a highlighted entry. See this? He said. I squinted. Not really. Exactly, Dolly laughed. That's my girl, she teased. Philip sighed. There's a $7,000 transfer. The room froze. What? We all shouted in unison. He pointed again, the Monday after the fundraiser. My pulse began pounding. A transfer, $7,000. The exact amount stolen. My eyes widened. Well, where did it go? Wait, do I want to know? I mean, I want to know, but how do you know? Oh well, continue, I said. That's the interesting part, Philip explained. I hated that phrase, almost as much as Detective Merritt's version. Philip clicked another document. It went through an account tied to church bookkeeping. The room fell silent again, because suddenly we weren't dealing with missing cash anymore. We were dealing with records, financial records. Someone had moved money, deliberately, carefully, methodically. The kind of thing that didn't happen accidentally. Dolly slowly sat down. Well, I'll be, she said, while fanning herself. I think this whole thing's got some serious roots, Poppy said. No argument there. By late afternoon, the consultation table looked like an accountant's nightmare. Papers everywhere, notes, printouts, timelines, photographs. The deeper we dug, the clearer the picture became. And yet one thing was still missing. Proof. We had clues, theories, suspicions, but not proof. Dolly was wrapping a bouquet for a customer, while muttering to herself. A common occurrence. Suddenly she stopped. The ribbon froze in her hands. Her eyes widened. Oh. I looked up at her. What's going on? I asked. Dolly slowly turned toward us. What if we stop looking for who took the money? Poppy frowned. And start looking for what? She asked, a little confused by the suggestion. What they're still hiding, I said. The room went silent, because in that moment, everything clicked. The Buttercups, the break-in, the threats, the vandalism. None of it had been about the theft. Not really. It had been about something else. Something connected to church records. Something connected to bookkeeping. Something someone desperately wanted hidden. My pulse quickened. Dolly. What? She said. I smiled and gave her a big hug. I think you're right, I said. For the first time in days, the entire picture began coming into focus. That evening, Detective Merritt joined us after closing. We spread everything across the consultation table. The records, the photographs, the timelines, the witness statements. One by one we walked through it all. Nobody spoke for a long time. "You've got enough." My heart skipped. "Enough?" "Enough to force a mistake," she said. The words hung in the air. Poppy smiled slowly. I felt hope for the first time in days. Not certainty. Hope. Merritt tapped the table. "We don't need a confession." "No?" I inquired. "We need movement," she said. I looked at her. "What are you suggesting?" A smile touched the detective's lips. "A trap." The word seemed to electrify the room. Poppy immediately sat straighter. "Oh, I love a trap." That probably should have concerned me. Instead, it made me laugh. For the next hour, we built a plan. A risky one. A simple one. And if we were right, a plan that would finally reveal the truth. Late that night, after Detective Merritt left, Philip went to bed, and Poppy went upstairs for the night with Violet and Scott. I sat alone in the flower shop. The buttercups glowed softly beneath the overhead lights. The familiar scent of fresh flowers filled the room. For the first time since the fundraiser, I felt like we were close. Really close. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Detective Merritt. 3 words. "It's in motion." My pulse quickened, because somewhere in Bloomwood, someone had just received the bait. And if our theory was right, by tomorrow night, we'd finally know who had stolen $7,000 from Bloomwood Baptist Church. Mama always used to say the truth had terrible timing. It showed up late, made a mess, upset everybody. Then somehow, by God's grace, it made things better. Standing across the street from Bloomwood Baptist Church that Thursday night, I hoped she was right. The humid night air wrapped around us like a damp quilt, carrying the sweet scent of freshly cut grass and blooming honeysuckle from the church garden. Crickets chirped from the tree line, while the old church steeple stretched toward a sky sprinkled with stars. The sanctuary windows glowed softly beneath the security lights, casting patches of colored light across the empty parking lot. Everything looked peaceful. Too peaceful. I shifted in the passenger seat of Detective Merritt's unmarked SUV and rubbed my clammy palms against my jeans. Beside me, Poppy bounced one knee nervously. Detective Merritt sat behind the wheel, one hand resting casually on the steering wheel, while the other held a travel mug of coffee. If I hadn't known better, I'd have thought she was waiting in line at the bank instead of preparing to catch a church thief. She lowered the radio microphone from her shoulder. "My officers are already in position," she said quietly, glancing toward the church. 2 behind the fellowship hall, 1 covering the cemetery entrance, 2 more behind the educational building. Poppy leaned forward, trying to peer through the windshield. "I don't see anybody." Merritt smiled faintly. "That's the idea." I swallowed. "So, we're just waiting?" "We're waiting," Merritt replied. "And before either of you gets any ideas," she turned and looked directly at us, "you stay in this vehicle." Poppy blinked innocently. "Us?" "Yes, you," Merritt said, pointing at us. "I wasn't planning anything," I said. Detective Merritt lifted one eyebrow. "I've known you 2 long enough not to believe that." I tried my best to look offended. "We can follow directions. You've broken into buildings, crawled through basement windows, and questioned suspects without telling me." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Poppy folded her arms and grinned. "Well, when you say it like that." Merritt pointed a finger toward us again. "You stay in the car." "Yes, ma'am," I answered. Poppy nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely." The detective looked unconvinced. So noted. For a moment, silence settled over us again. The church bells chimed the quarter hour in the distance. A warm breeze rustled the oak trees lining the parking lot. My stomach twisted tighter with every passing minute. Poppy finally broke the silence. "If this doesn't work," she whispered, "we'll just tell folks we came out here to watch birds." I turned and stared at her. "Birds?" She shrugged. "Bird watching is relaxing," I snorted. "At 10 o'clock at night?" "There are probably nocturnal birds," she said coyly. I laughed softly. "The only thing flying around right now is mosquitoes." She waved a hand dismissively. "Maybe they're insomniac birds." Even Detective Merritt chuckled into her coffee cup. "I'd pay good money to hear you explain that one to Detective Tate." Poppy smiled proudly. "I can be very convincing." "You sure can," I muttered. The laughter faded almost as quickly as it came. The waiting returned. 5 minutes, 10, 20. Every passing car made my heart jump. Every rustle in the bushes sounded like footsteps. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 10:42 p.m. The silence stretched so long that even Poppy stopped talking. Then, Detective Merritt suddenly straightened, her eyes locked on the far end of the parking lot. Movement. I followed her gaze. Headlights swept slowly across the church lawn before disappearing as a sedan eased into the side parking lot. The engine shut off. Nobody moved inside. Nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. Someone stepped out. It was hard to see in the distance. Even in the dim light, though, the silhouette looked familiar. The person looked over each shoulder before reaching into their pocket. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Without a sound, they walked toward the church fellowship hall entrance. A set of keys glinted beneath the security light. The church door clicked open. Then they slipped inside. The door eased shut behind them. Detective Merritt quietly lifted the radio to her mouth. Her voice dropped to little more than a whisper. "Everybody hold." A crackle answered. She waited another few seconds, watching the church. Then she pressed the button again. "All units, move." Almost immediately, dark figures emerged from the shadows surrounding the church. One officer stepped from behind the fellowship hall. Another crossed quietly from the cemetery gate. Two more moved along the side of the educational building, keeping low beneath the windows. If I hadn't known they were there, I'd never have seen them. Merritt set down her coffee, opened the driver's door, then turned back toward us one last time. "Stay in the car." Poppy nodded. Scout's honor. I nodded too. "We'll be right here." Merritt looked from me to Poppy, then back again. "I don't believe either of you." Despite the seriousness of the moment, I smiled. She shook her head with the weary expression of someone who already knew exactly what was about to happen. Then she quietly closed the door and disappeared into the darkness behind the officers. I watched her cross the church lawn, her shadow swallowed by the moonlight. The silence inside Detective Merritt's SUV lasted exactly 3 seconds. Beside me, Poppy slowly turned her head toward me. One eyebrow lifted. I looked back at her. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. After spending our whole lives together, we'd developed a language all our own. Sometimes a glance said more than a paragraph ever could. I sighed and reached for the door handle. "So much for staying in the car," I whispered. Poppy grinned. I was thinking the exact same thing. Quietly, we slipped out of the SUV, easing the doors shut with barely a click. The warm summer air wrapped around us again, carrying the earthy scent of freshly watered flower beds and damp grass. Somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called into the night, and the steady chorus of crickets seemed almost deafening now that we were outside. We crouched low and hurried across the church lawn, careful to stay in the shadows beneath the old maple trees. "I feel like we're 12 years old sneaking cookies before supper," Poppy whispered, trying to suppress a smile. I couldn't help but chuckle. "Mama always knew." Poppy nodded, "every single time." "And somehow we're still making questionable decisions," I said. She whispered, "I think this is an excellent decision." I gave her a sideways look. "I'll remind you that Detective Merritt specifically told us to stay put." Poppy shrugged. She also knew we weren't going to. I couldn't argue with that. Ahead of us, Detective Merritt and the officers disappeared through the fellowship hall entrance, without making a sound. Poppy leaned closer. "We're terrible at following directions." "We're worse at walking away from trouble," I added. "True," Poppy agreed. We slipped through the partially open church door, just before it eased shut. The sanctuary greeted us with cool, still air that smelled faintly of lemonwood polish, old hymnals, candle wax, and decades of Sunday morning sermons. Moonlight filtered through the stained glass windows, washing the pews in patches of ruby, sapphire, and gold. The colorful light danced across the polished oak floor, giving the quiet sanctuary an almost heavenly glow. For just a moment. It didn't feel like the scene of a crime. It felt sacred. Our footsteps echoed softly, despite our best efforts to be quiet. Each creak of the wooden floor made my heart skip. Somewhere near the front of the sanctuary, a floorboard groaned. Everyone froze. Poppy instinctively grabbed my arm. I could feel her fingers trembling. I wasn't doing much better. Detective Merritt, several pews ahead of us, raised one hand without looking back, signaling the officers to spread out. Like shadows, they moved silently down opposite aisles. One officer slipped behind the choir loft. Another disappeared near the side door. Merritt continued toward the pulpit, slow, steady, patient. We followed several pews behind, ducking low. From where I stood, I could see it was Cheryl Langford, kneeling beside the wooden platform beneath the pulpit. She glanced nervously over both shoulders, then lifted a trapdoor under the podium on the pulpit. She pulled out a big bag and a thick white envelope. My pulse pounded in my ears. Slowly, very slowly. "Look," Poppy breathed, barely louder than the rustling pages of an old hymnal. I nodded. She came back. Cheryl reached inside the envelope and pulled something out. In the dim light, I could see it was a USB drive. She turned the USB drive over in her hand, staring at it for a long moment. Her shoulders slumped. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. Detective Merritt stepped from behind the front pew. Her voice rang through the sanctuary loudly, calm and commanding. "Police, put your hands up," she shouted out. The words echoed against the vaulted ceiling. Cheryl's head snapped up. She looked like a deer in headlights. Merritt took another step. "Don't move." Everything stopped. The officers emerged from every direction. The sanctuary suddenly felt much smaller, much quieter. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Cheryl's eyes darted toward the side aisle, toward the open space between the pews. Fear overtook reason, clutching the bag, white envelope, and USB drive tightly in her fist. She ran. The moment Cheryl bolted, the quiet sanctuary exploded into motion. "Stop!" Detective Merritt shouted, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Two officers lunged toward the center aisle. Cheryl ducked around the end of the first pew, her sensible flats slapping against the polished hardwood floor. The envelope slipped from her hand onto the floor, but she clung tightly to the bag and the tiny USB drive, as if it were the last thing holding her life together. "Block the side aisle," Merritt ordered, pointing toward the choir loft. "Yes, ma'am," one officer yelled out, as he sprinted toward the rear of the sanctuary. Every time an officer moved in one direction, Cheryl darted another. She rounded one row of pews, then another. Her breathing came in ragged gasps that echoed through the empty church. My heart pounded just as hard. "Cheryl," I yelled, instinctively stepping into the aisle. "Stop. You're making this worse." For the briefest second, she looked at me. I saw it in her eyes. Fear, panic, desperation. Then she turned away and ran even faster. "No," Merritt barked. "Cut her off." An officer rushed toward the fellowship hall entrance. Another moved from the choir side. Cheryl glanced from one officer to the next, realizing the exits were disappearing. She spun sharply, doubling back, straight toward the pulpit. "Oh no," I whispered. The raised platform was only a few steps away. If she reached the opposite side, she might squeeze between the piano and the choir chairs before the officers could surround her. Poppy saw it too. Without thinking, she stepped directly into Cheryl's path. "Poppy!" I shouted. My sister planted her feet at the bottom of the pulpit steps, her arms stretched wide. "Cheryl," she pleaded, holding up both hands. "Don't do this. It's over." For one heartbeat, Cheryl hesitated. Her chest heaved. Tears shimmered in her eyes. Then instinct took over. "I'm sorry," Cheryl cried, as she shoved Poppy hard with both hands. "Poppy!" I screamed. My sister stumbled backward. Her foot missed the top step. Poppy lost her balance and screamed loudly. She tumbled down the 3 wooden steps with a sickening thud. Her shoulder struck first, then her hip. Finally, her ankle twisted beneath her with an awful popping sound that made my stomach lurch. She cried out, "Ah!" The sound ripped through the sanctuary. Every person froze, even Cheryl. She stood motionless at the top of the steps, breathing hard. Her eyes locked on Poppy, who lay curled on the polished floor, clutching her ankle. Tears streamed down Poppy's cheeks. "Oh, my ankle," I asked, through clenched teeth. "Iris," she cried softly. I dropped to my knees beside her. "I've got you," I said, sliding an arm behind her shoulders. "Easy, easy." Poppy squeezed my hands so tightly, my fingers went numb. I think I heard it," Poppy said. "I know," I whispered, brushing curls away from her damp forehead. "Don't move." Across from us, Cheryl stared in horror, her face sweaty and fearful. She slowly lowered her hand, still clutching the bag and the USB drive. "Oh my God," she whispered. The panic drained from her expression, replaced by overwhelming guilt. "I didn't," her voice cracked. "I didn't mean—" Before she could finish, 2 officers reached her. "Hands behind your back," one officer ordered firmly. Cheryl didn't resist, not even a little. The bag and USB drive slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the wooden platform. Detective Merritt stepped forward from out of the shadows, and an officer stepped up to her. "You need to see this, Detective Merritt," he said, and handed her the white envelope. Detective Merritt looked inside of the envelope, her eyes widened. "Well, this is a lot of cash, Cheryl," she said, then nodded to the officers. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the silent sanctuary. Cheryl never looked away from Poppy. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Poppy, I'm so sorry." Poppy looked up through tears, still clutching her ankle. She was in too much pain to answer. The sanctuary fell silent once more. The only sounds were Poppy's uneven breathing and the quiet groans she couldn't hold back as I gently supported her against the front pew. Only moments earlier, it had been filled with pounding footsteps, shouted commands, and the metallic snap of handcuffs. Now, it was heartbreakingly quiet. Colored moonlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting ribbons of crimson, sapphire, and amber across the polished oak floor. Dust floated lazily through the beams of light, while the scent of lemon wood polish, old hymnals, and candle wax hung heavy in the still air. I slipped an arm behind Poppy's shoulders and helped her sit upright against the front pew. "You all right?" I asked softly, brushing a loose curl away from her face. Poppy sucked in a sharp breath and tried to smile through the pain. "I've had better days." Despite everything, I laughed. "Can you move it?" She carefully shifted her foot. The moment her ankle twisted, she winced. "Oh, Lord." She squeezed her eyes shut. "I'll take that as a no," I said. "It feels like somebody dropped a piano on it," she said. I gently rested my hand on hers. "Don't move." "I wasn't planning on it," she said. Across the sanctuary, Detective Merritt bent down and picked up the USB drive and bag where they had fallen near the pulpit. She slipped it carefully into an evidence bag. Then she peeked inside the bag, shook her head, releasing a knowing smile before walking toward Cheryl. The two officers stood quietly on either side of Cheryl, who no longer looked like a woman trying to escape. She looked exhausted. Her shoulders sagged beneath the weight of years she'd been carrying alone. I slowly stood. Every emotion I'd felt over the last week tangled together inside me. Anger, relief, confusion, sadness. I walked toward Cheryl until only a few feet separated us. She slowly lifted her eyes. They were swollen with tears. I searched her face for answers. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. "Why, Cheryl?" My voice echoed softly through the sanctuary. For several long moments, she couldn't speak. Then her shoulders began to shake. "I never thought," she whispered, her voice cracking, "that one mistake could become my whole life." Tears spilled onto her cheeks. Detective Merritt remained silent. The officers said nothing. Even Poppy watched quietly from the front pew. Cheryl swallowed hard. It started years ago. She twisted her cuffed hands together. There were bookkeeping mistakes. She looked toward the altar. Little mistakes, simple ones. I told myself I'd fix them before anyone noticed. She laughed bitterly. They always notice. She wiped her face with her shoulder. So I covered those mistakes. Then I covered the cover-up. Her voice grew quieter. And after a while, I couldn't remember where the truth ended. I nodded slowly. "We found the discrepancies." "I know." Cheryl closed her eyes. But the bookkeeping wasn't the worst part. She hesitated, ashamed, then finally whispered, "I have a gambling addiction." The words seemed to hang in the sanctuary. Heavy, painful, real. "I kept thinking the next trip to the casino would fix everything," Cheryl continued, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Just one big win, just enough to pay the money back before anyone ever found out." She laughed softly at herself. It never happened. The more I lost, the harder I chased it. She looked at me. I wasn't chasing money anymore. I was chasing hope. My heart ached for her, not because she was innocent, because she was broken. "Amanda tried to save me," Cheryl continued, her voice trembling. "She took out personal loans, opened credit cards, borrowed money she didn't have. She kept telling me we'd get through it together." A sob escaped her lips. "I ruined her." The words broke in the middle. "I destroyed her credit. She's about to be sued over a loan she only took out because she was trying to help her mama." Cheryl began to fully sob. Poppy lowered her eyes. Even Detective Merritt's expression softened. I thought, Cheryl whispered, if I could borrow the $7,000 from the fundraiser. She couldn't even say the word steal. I'd pay everything off, she continued, then replace the money before anybody noticed. She shook her head slowly, but after I took it, I panicked. I drove straight to the casino. Her voice became almost inaudible. I lost every single penny. Silence filled the sanctuary. I could hear nothing but the hum of the old air conditioner and Poppy's quiet breathing behind me. Cheryl looked completely defeated. There wasn't anything left to repay. There wasn't anything left at all. I took a slow breath. Then another question surfaced. The Buttercup vases, I asked. Cheryl looked puzzled for a second. Then understanding crossed her face. You figured that part out. I nodded. Why take the centerpieces? She managed the faintest, saddest smile. Because nobody notices somebody carrying flowers. She looked toward the sanctuary doors. They notice somebody carrying a metal lockbox. But flowers? She shrugged weakly. Flowers belong in a church. The Buttercup arrangements hid the lockbox perfectly. You and Poppy made them beautiful. Her voice cracked again. I blended right in. I suddenly pictured it. People laughing, children running, smoke from the barbecue, church members carrying food, volunteers carrying flowers. No one paying Cheryl any attention. It was so simple. It was brilliant. But afterward, Cheryl continued, I realized I'd touched every vase. She looked at her cuffed hands. My fingerprints were all over them. So I went back and took every single centerpiece. Another tear rolled down her cheek. I thought I was covering my tracks. Instead, she'd left us the clue that solved the case. She looked directly at me. Iris, I'm sorry. She glanced toward Poppy. I never meant to involve Blossom and Thorne. I never wanted either of you dragged into this. Then her eyes settled on Poppy's swollen ankle. The color had already begun changing beneath the strap of her sandal. Cheryl's face crumpled. Oh, she closed her eyes. I'm so sorry. The words were barely more than a whisper. I never meant to hurt you. Poppy looked up at her, still wincing. I know. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it wasn't hatred either. Detective Merritt stepped forward and gently rested a hand on Cheryl's arm. Well, I have the Buttercup vases right here in the bag, along with this envelope of cash, thumb drive, and your confession, she said confidently. It's time, Cheryl, Detective Merritt said. Cheryl nodded without protest. She didn't look back as the officers led her slowly down the center aisle. The church doors opened. Cool night air drifted inside, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and honeysuckle. Red and blue patrol lights flashed silently across the stained glass windows, splashing ribbons of color over the sanctuary walls. I watched Cheryl pause beside the patrol car. She took one long look back at Bloomwood Baptist Church, then lowered her head. A moment later, the back door closed, and Detective Merritt quietly drove her away into the night. Poppy slowly pushed herself to her feet, keeping all her weight on one leg. Easy, I said, slipping an arm around her waist. She winced and grabbed my shoulder. Poppy, I really think you should go to the hospital. Before she could answer, one of the EMTs walked over carrying a medical bag. Mind if I take a quick look? He asked. A few minutes later, after gently examining her ankle, he wrapped it snugly in a compression bandage. It looks like a sprain, he said. Keep it elevated tonight. Ice it as soon as you get home. Take something for the pain, and call Dr. Brown in the morning if it's any worse. I will, Poppy promised. The EMT smiled knowingly. And no more chasing criminals. Poppy managed a crooked grin. I'll try. He laughed. I'm not sure I believe you. Neither did I. The flashing patrol lights reflected across the church windows as Detective Merritt climbed into her cruiser with Cheryl in the back seat. Poppy watched the patrol car disappear down Main Street before letting out a long breath. Iris, she said quietly, I just want to go home. You sure? I asked. She nodded. I'm sore. She shifted her weight and winced. I'm embarrassed. Then she leaned against me. And I'm tired. I smiled. Home sounds pretty good to me too. Together, we slowly made our way to the car, Poppy hopping beside me beneath the glow of the church lights while the last of the police cars disappeared into the warm night. By the time we pulled behind Blossom and Thorne, my body felt as tired as my heart. Warm light spilled from the apartment windows above the flower shop, and the familiar scent of fresh roses and eucalyptus drifted through the open back door. Home. I'd never been happier to see it. I hurried around the car and helped Poppy out. She wrapped an arm around my shoulders. Remind me, she muttered through a grimace, that next time we solve a mystery, nobody runs. I'll put it in writing, I said. We had barely reached the back steps when the door flew open. Scott rushed outside. The moment he saw Poppy's bandaged ankle, emotion filled his face. What happened? He asked, hurrying toward us. Then he looked at me. Why didn't anybody call me? I opened my mouth. Scott, Poppy gently squeezed my arm. No, she said softly. Don't. She looked at Scott. I told her not to. His eyebrows shot up. I knew you'd come running, and I didn't want you worrying until we knew I was okay. Scott sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. Poppy. I'm sorry, she said. He looked at her ankle again, then back at me. His voice softened. Iris. He gave me a tired smile. You okay? I nodded. I am now. Scott wrapped an arm around Poppy's shoulders. Let's get you inside. Just then, Philip stepped through the back door, carrying the garbage outside. He stopped when he noticed the bandage. Well? He looked from Poppy to me. I leave y'all alone for one evening. Poppy smiled. Apparently that was our mistake. I laughed and walked over to him. Before we go upstairs, I owe you a thank you. Philip looked surprised. For what? For being our secret weapon. He grinned. So, he folded his arms proudly. I'm officially hired? I smiled. As Blossom and Thorne's chief technology officer. His grin widened. I like the sound of that. Poppy rolled her eyes. Oh Lord, we've created a monster. Philip laughed. I prefer genius. We all laughed. For the first time in days, it felt easy. I looked toward the apartment staircase. Come on. I smiled at my family. Let's go upstairs. Scott lifted Poppy and carried her upstairs, and Philip and I followed. For the first time all week, home finally felt peaceful again. The next evening, the apartment above Blossom and Thorne smelled like Scott's chicken and sausage gumbo as it simmered on the stove while fresh cornbread cooled on the counter. Sweet tea waited in a glass pitcher, and the familiar scent of fresh flowers drifted upstairs from the shop below. For the first time in days, everything felt peaceful. Poppy sat at the table with her bandaged ankle propped on another chair, while Dolly proudly carried in a lemon pie. She set it in the middle of the table with a flourish. My justice pie. Philip grinned. Does it taste better after solving a mystery? Dolly placed a hand over her heart. It most certainly does. What's the secret ingredient? Philip asked. She winked. Victory. Everyone laughed. The old oak table that had belonged to Mama Thorne soon filled with steaming bowls of gumbo, thick slices of cornbread, easy conversation, and the kind of laughter that only comes after surviving something hard together. For a little while, no one talked about stolen money, or suspects, or church scandals. We were simply a family, sharing supper. Halfway through the meal, Violet looked up from her cornbread. Aunt Iris? I smiled. Yes, sweetheart? She tilted her head. Did we save the church? The room grew quiet. I looked around the table, at Scott, at Dolly, at Philip, at Poppy, then back at Violet. I smiled. We helped. She thought about that for a moment. So everybody helped? I nodded. They did. Detective Merritt, Pastor Earl, and everyone who chose to tell the truth. Violet smiled. That's good. Then she happily went back to her cornbread. Kids had a wonderful way of reminding you what really mattered. Later that evening, after the dishes were washed and Justice Pie had mysteriously disappeared one slice at a time, Poppy and I sat out, in front of the shop on Main Street, sipping our sweet tea and enjoying the night breeze. The street had mostly cleared of people for the night, leaving only fireflies floating across Main Street like tiny lanterns. Honeysuckle scented the warm summer breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle drifted across the Kentucky hills. Bloomwood was finally at peace. Poppy leaned back and smiled. Mama would have had something to say about all this. I laughed. Oh, she absolutely would, and she'd probably start with fussing at us for not staying in the car. Without question, Poppy agreed. Then her smile softened. You know, I think she'd be proud of us. I looked toward the steeple of Bloomwood Baptist, rising above the trees. Mama used to say, churches are built with brick and stained glass. They're built on trust. This week, our town had learned just how fragile that trust could be. Neighbors had questioned neighbors. Friends had doubted friends. But the truth had finally come into the light. And maybe, just maybe, Bloomwood had started finding its way back. I smiled. You know what Mama would really say? Poppy looked at me. What? that we're more stubborn than buttercups growing through red clay. Poppy laughed. She'd be exactly right. We sat quietly together, watching the fireflies dance above Main Street, while laughter drifted through the open apartment windows behind us. Sometimes the sweetest blooms grow from the hardest seasons. And in Bloomwood, hope always finds a way to bloom. And that's the end of Buttercups, Barbecue, and Burglary. Thank you for spending a little time with me here in Bloomwood. If this story made you smile, kept you guessing, or reminded you of the people and places that feel like home, I'd love for you to join us again. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next Thorne Sisters Sleuths cozy mystery. Because around here, trouble has a funny way of blooming when you least expect it.
Read the Thorne Sisters Sleuths Cozy Mystery Series. Available wherever paperbacks are sold and on Audible, Kindle, and free on Kindle Unlimited.